This woman entered an Appalachian valley at sunrise and emerged at sunset, but only 3 minutes had passed on her phone. Her hair had grown 2 inches. She's not the only one. The ground beneath your feet in the Appalachian Valley is older than most things you can wrap your head around. We're talking 480 million years old. That's ancient even by mountain standards. While other mountain ranges were still figuring out how to be mountains, the Appalachians were already weathered veterans, shaped by ice ages and countless storms. These aren't just any hills either. The Appalachian chain stretches an impressive 1,500 miles from the frozen wilderness of Canada, all the way down to Alabama's sticky summers. Makes sense why they've collected so many stories along the way, right? Every ridge and valley has witnessed more history than any textbook could ever capture. Long before Europeans showed up with their compasses and land surveys, Native American peoples called these valleys home for thousands of years. The Cherokee, Creek, and dozens of other tribes knew every stream, every cave, every hunting trail. They understood something about this land that newcomers would take centuries to figure out, if they ever did. Then there are the legends. Oh, the legends these mountains have spawned over the centuries. Native peoples spoke of strange lights dancing between the peaks on moonless nights. Sounds that didn't quite match any known animal echoed through the hollows. Voices that seemed to come from the rocks themselves. European settlers heard these stories and added their own tales of mysterious happenings. The mountains seemed to collect mysteries like they collected morning fog. But here's where things get really interesting. Hidden in these ancient valleys are plants that exist literally nowhere else on Earth. We're talking about species that evolved in complete isolation, cut off from the rest of the world by towering ridges and deep gorges. Some of these plants are so rare that botanists get genuinely excited when they find a new patch growing in some forgotten corner of the mountains. The weird part is how these mountains seem to bend the rules, not just the rules of botany, but the rules of everything. Local people have always insisted that time moves differently here. Clocks that work perfectly fine in the city somehow lose track of hours in the mountains. Visitors arrive expecting to stay for a weekend and find themselves still there a week later, not quite sure where the days went. Weather patterns that make meteorologists scratch their heads. Fog that rolls in like clockwork some mornings, then disappears for weeks without explanation. Seasons that arrive early in one valley, while the next valley over is still locked in the previous season. Even the way sunlight filters through these ancient trees feels different from anywhere else. Native elders used to say the mountains remembered everything. Every footstep, every storm, every change in the world around them. Maybe that's why time feels so fluid here. When you're standing on ground that's witnessed nearly 500 million years of history, modern concepts like schedules and deadlines start to feel pretty silly. And speaking of time feeling different, wait until you experience what happens when the morning fog rolls in. Morning arrives differently in the Appalachian Valley. The sun climbs over those ancient ridges, but instead of bringing clarity, it wraps everything in a thick blanket of fog that can last until noon. Your alarm goes off at 7, but the world outside looks like someone draped cheesecloth over everything. Time becomes meaningless when you can't see past your own mailbox. This isn't your typical suburban fog that burns off in 30 minutes. We're talking about fog so dense that school buses wait at the depot, their drivers sipping coffee and checking their watches every few minutes. Some mornings the mist clings so stubbornly to the valleys that locals just shrug and say, well, looks like we're starting late today. Makes sense, right? Then there's the peculiar charm of small-town rhythms that refuse to bow to modern urgency. Walk down Main Street in any of these valley towns around noon, and you'll find half the shops with handwritten signs reading "Gone to lunch, back at 1:30. The hardware store owner locks up, the barber flips his sign, even the bank teller steps out for a proper meal. It's like the entire town agrees that some things matter more than continuous commerce. But here's where it gets really interesting. Several villages in these mountains have quietly opted out of daylight saving time altogether. While the rest of America springs forward and falls back, these communities stick to their own steady beat. The mayor of one such town once explained, "The cows don't care what the government says about time, and neither do we." And the weird part is how summer daylight behaves here. The sun sets behind the western peaks, sure, but somehow light lingers in the valleys for what feels like hours afterward. It's not quite day, not quite night, just this magical in-between time when kids can play outside until nearly 10 o'clock, and nobody thinks twice about it. The mountains create their own twilight zone, stretching golden hour into something that would make photographers weep with joy. Local folks have developed their own temporal language entirely, Ask someone when something happened, and they might say, "Oh, that was 3 floods ago," or right after the big wind took down the oak by Miller's Place. Events become the measuring sticks instead of calendar dates. The creek that runs through town floods predictably every few years, and locals use those floods like other people use decades. Well, there's old Mrs. Henderson who still calls everyone to dinner when the train whistle blows at 6:15, even though that train hasn't run on schedule since the Carter administration. The whistle comes whenever it comes, and dinner happens accordingly. Her family has learned to stay flexible. This unique relationship with time isn't just quaint mountain charm, it's practical adaptation to a landscape that operates by its own rules. These valleys have taught their people that rigid schedules often matter less than paying attention to what's actually happening around you. But what happens when this flexible mountain time crashes headlong into the official, government-mandated time zones that slice right through these communities? You know how your phone automatically updates when you cross state lines? Well, forget that convenience in the Appalachian Valley. Here, time zones don't follow neat state borders or logical patterns. They zigzag through communities like a drunk tourist trying to find his way back to the hotel. Most of the Appalachian Valley sits firmly in the Eastern time zone, but here's where things get interesting. Drive 30 minutes down a winding mountain road, and suddenly you've gained or lost an hour without crossing a single state line. Some counties decided they wanted to march to their own drummer, creating pockets of Central Time smack in the middle of Eastern Time territory. The weirdest part, these time zone boundaries don't follow any sensible pattern. One line traces the Tennessee River for miles, then suddenly veers off to follow a mountain ridge that probably made sense to surveyors a century ago but confuses everyone today. Another boundary literally follows an old railroad track that hasn't seen a train since the 1980s. Makes sense, right? Then there are the communities that straddle both zones. Picture this, you live on Oak Street and your house runs on Eastern Time. Your neighbor across the street, Central Time. Their pizza gets delivered an hour before yours, even when you order at the exact same moment. The local high school had to pick one zone for classes, so half the kids show up feeling like they're either really early or fashionably late every single day. Railway companies created most of this mess back in the late 1800s. Before standardized time zones, every town kept its own time based on when the sun hit its highest point. Trains couldn't run schedules when every stop had a different clock. The solution was supposed to make things simpler. Well, that backfired spectacularly in these mountains. Some towns got fed up and just declared their independence from the whole system. They'd pick whichever time zone helped their businesses most. If the county seat ran on Eastern Time, they'd sync up for government meetings. But if the nearest big city used Central Time, they'd switch for shopping trips. Talk about having your cake and eating it too. The confusion reaches peak absurdity during daylight saving time changes. While most places spring forward or fall back together, these mountain communities create a patchwork of time that would make a Swiss clockmaker weep. Some follow federal rules, others ignore them completely, and a few change their minds depending on the year. GPS systems have nervous breakdowns trying to calculate drive times here. Your phone might show 3 different arrival times for the same destination, depending on which route you take, and how many time zone boundaries you cross. Local businesses learn to put both times on their signs, just to avoid the endless phone calls from confused customers. But the real victims, the mail carriers and delivery drivers who somehow have to make sense of it all. They've developed an almost supernatural ability to track time across multiple zones while navigating roads that barely show up on maps. Speaking of the people who call this time-twisted region home, they've adapted in ways that might surprise you. Life in the Appalachian Valley means your smartphone clock might lie to you. Ask any local when the town meeting starts, and they'll say when Mrs. Henderson finishes her evening garden watering. That's just how things work here. The teenagers still gather at what their grandparents called lightning bug time, that magical hour, when dusk settles. But darkness hasn't quite arrived. No specific time needed. Their phones might read 7:30 p.m. or 8:45 p.m. depending on which cellular tower picks up the signal. But everyone knows when lightning bug time begins. Schools here operate on what teachers jokingly call fog schedules, when morning mist rolls so thick you can't see your hand in front of your face. Classes start late, period. The school buses simply won't risk those winding mountain roads. Makes sense, right? But try explaining that to a visiting state inspector who drove 3 hours to arrive at 8 a.m. sharp, only to find empty classrooms and a note taped to the front door. Then there's the wedding problem. Couples planning ceremonies often forget to specify which time zone they mean on invitations. Picture this: half the guests arrive an hour early, half arrive an hour late, and the bride's family is frantically calling everyone wondering where they are. Local churches now stamp mountain time or valley time in bold letters on their wedding announcements. The railroad workers figured this out decades ago when trains kept missing connections. They created unofficial depot time, basically splitting the difference between official time zones. Smart solution for a confusing problem. But here's where things get really interesting. Some valley residents swear their old pocket watches run differently here than in the cities. They'll show you grandfather clocks that seem to tick slower on foggy mornings. Scientists call it nonsense, but locals just shrug and wind their watches by how they feel, not what the radio announcer says. Well, the strangest part might be how visitors react. City folks arrive checking their phones constantly, stressed about being late for everything. After a few days they start leaving their watches in hotel rooms. Something about mountain air and that slower rhythm just takes over. Local businesses have adapted beautifully. The hardware store posts 2 different closing times on busy days. One for locals who know the owner always stays late if you need something important. Another for tourists who expect everything by the book. The diner serves breakfast until whenever the last customer stops wanting eggs. No arbitrary 11 a.m. cutoff here. Kids growing up in the valley learn to read natural time before digital time. They know when afternoon thunderstorms roll in by how the air feels, when to head home by how shadows fall across specific ridgelines. Their internal clocks sync to seasons and weather patterns instead of atomic precision. The valley's unique relationship with time isn't just about confusing time zones or stubborn traditions. It's about people choosing to live by rhythms that actually matter to them. Harvest seasons, family gatherings, and the natural world around them. In our hyper-scheduled modern world, maybe the Appalachian Valley has figured out something the rest of us forgot.